And then at the end, I went to the Central Highlands and a fire support base, Brown.
Were you drafted or did you enlist?
I was drafted.
Where were you living at the time?
At 65 Mountain Avenue in Winston, Connecticut.
Do you recall the date?
No, but I recall the letter because it said, "Greetings. You are hereby inducted into the Armed Forces of the United States." And then it had a few other lines, but I can't remember the date.
Okay, and this is U.S. Army, correct?
Yes.
What were your first days in the Army like?
Well, the first days in the Army were fairly easy, only because of the fact that you went through a battery of tests, and they gave you your clothing. And it wasn't until, I want to say, day 2 or 3 that the actual DIs going into basic training took control. And then it all kind of changed from that point. Just what I mean by that is the heavy discipline came in at that particular point in time.
What was the heavy discipline like? Like, what did they do?
Well, I think they were trying to let everyone know that they were going to be in charge and you needed to do exactly what they told you. And if you did those, you would be fine. And they kind of broke it down that from your thought process, you were no longer an individual. You were in a group, and everybody had to abide by the same rules and regulations.
What were some of their unique punishments?
Well, when I went in, I probably was 20 pounds overweight, maybe, to give you an example. And because I was overweight, they made you a road guard, which means you had to run ahead of everybody else and do the road guard. So you actually had more physical training. And then once you lost that weight, then you didn't have to be the road guard on. But if you didn't lose the weight, you were always going to be the road guard. And then they wouldn't let you eat. They had this line that they had the best way I could describe it is a horizontal ladder with runs on it. Mm-hmm. And you had to go through that before you could eat. And if you weighed too much and you couldn't pull yourself and go through the ladder, they wouldn't let you eat. And it wasn't they didn't let you eat all 3 meals. They probably, maybe they didn't let you eat supper because you had to lose weight. So if you decided you were going to eat a lot and not lose weight, they were going to make it so that you were going to lose the weight, whether you wanted to lose it or not. So, and I had lost, I don't know how in basic training, I probably lost 40 pounds. So.
Okay, did you train on the M16 or was the M14 still around?
No, what we did is, the M14, I want to say we probably did the M14 for 2 weeks. And that was because maybe it was a little longer, but the only reason you trained on the M14 to me was that was the weapon that they could do all the military, like parade rest, right shoulder, arms, left shoulder. When you got to the M16, you couldn't do that. So after we trained on that, then we were trained on the M16, and that's the primary weapon we were trained on.
What was your impressions of it?
Because now I'm in the later stages. They figured out all the problems, and I never had an issue with the M16. Never, never, never. So I'd be lying to you if I said anything different.
Okay. Where did you go after basic training?
I went to Fort Benning, Georgia. Okay.
Okay.
And did some training there. Not so much infantry training at all, but getting adaptation to the engineering group. And I was in, and I knew you could recognize it right away, that I was in a holding pattern for Vietnam. Now, you knew you were going. It was just a question of when your orders were cut.
When you say you knew you were going, how did you know? What were those signs?
Well, because what they did is they had guys that had been to Vietnam in the engineering group there, and then you were mixed in with them. And once you spent time with them, you're going to ask them questions because you know you're going, get you a little bit acclimated to it. So after I was there, honestly, 3 weeks, I knew I was going. There was no doubt in my mind, absolutely none. And that's the only reason, if you could research my record, I volunteered for Vietnam only because of the fact I knew I was going, and I said, just let me get it over with. That's the only reason.
had you known friends and other folks that had been to Vietnam?
Yes. I have an older brother. He was there. I had a cousin that was there. All my friends in high school, basically all of them had been drafted. And I hadn't seen a lot. They were still in. But I knew they had all been in. So I knew a lot about it.
Did you, in retrospect, did you know what you were in for?
No. And I don't believe anybody can know. You know.
Now, did you see any combat while you were in Vietnam? Or when did you go to Vietnam?
February 1970. Okay. And took us about 24 hours. We went by air. We left out of Oakland, California. Okay, and it was, I believe it's Travis Air Force Base. We went from there to Alaska, Alaska to Japan, and Japan into Vietnam. Okay, and the time I knew where it was, because when we landed, boy, they opened up the door and it was a heat wave, unbelievable. But they put us in the bus, and I can remember the bus didn't have any windows in it. Okay, and all it had was barbed wire where the windows were, and it was like in 1-inch squares. Mm-hmm. And of course, somebody asked the bus driver, he says, "How come you don't have any windows and everything's barbed wired?" And then, but all the bus drivers said, "That's so nobody can throw a grenade in." And that's kind of hit home,
right?
You know. So, but I spent we landed at Benoit, and I went to that big army base that's there for 2 days. Oh man, it was the largest base in Vietnam, and we just got assigned out, and then from there I was assigned to go to Lac Hay. Okay, and I shipped out at, I want to say probably 2 days, and then we were in Lac Hay.
And whereabouts was Lac Hay?
I want to say, and I'm just kind of guessing because they didn't tell us very much about this. I want to say it was probably any place from 25 to 35 miles northeast of Saigon, and it was right along Highway 13.
And what was your daily life like in that unit?
Because I was in the engineers, and the first assignment was along Highway 13 and I'm surmising they blew up a bridge, and we had to build a new bridge. And we worked on that bridge every day, and when we would come back to Lac Hay every night. And I don't know what it was there. I honestly, I apologize, but I forget. I can't remember. Was it maybe every third night we had to pull guard duty at Lac Hay on what we call the bunker line? And then if you weren't doing it, the next day they would load you in deuce and a halves, and they would drive us back out to the bridge. And that continual rotation, except for a few times that something would happen, either, I don't know, a truck would break down or something, and we ended up staying in that fire support base that was out in the field, that Thunder 3. But normally we were not there. And in the life in Lac Hay, it was like we lived in, I guess the way that we all use them was they're hooches. They're very simply built shacks that are basically screened in porches, if you want to think of it like that. And they throw a couple beds in there, and that's what you slept in. And, you know, you could take a shower there. That was not an issue in the area that you were. And that was kind of our life, because they kind of worked you like 16 hours a day. So you'd work to 16, you'd come back, you'd probably have to pull guard duty. You're always a little tired, but we were a lot better off than anybody that was in the infantry. So I need to tell you that. That's important.
Now, did your unit experience any casualties?
Yeah, but you know, not too many, but we definitely did. There was no question. And the one thing that bothers me my whole life is when I became the squad leader, that there was 3 guys that were introduced to me, brand spanking new. They weren't. It was. I'm assuming it's like me. They were probably in country 4 or 5 days, and they came in, and I said, "Well, I'll check you guys in later," and I kind of brushed them off. And I want to say 5 to 10 minutes later, all 3 were dead. and I can't even remember their names. That's what bothers me. I didn't even take the time to remember their names.
What happened?
Had a rocket attack, and the hooch that they were in, it took a direct hit, and we couldn't even find any, pieces of skin. It was all. But again, it wasn't directed at us. We were close to a helicopter pad on Loch Hay, and they were after the helicopters, and this fell short and casualties. But yeah, that's the one thing. And then we had one night up in Thunder 3 when we stayed over, there was a guy was killed up there, and that was that was actually an attack on the base. But we had a lot of casualties, but a lot of it wasn't due to combat. It was just that there was so much explosive things around that guys would make a mistake. Like I'll give you an example. They had the Claymore mines, okay, and they had the clacker, okay, and you hit the clacker and the Claymore mine goes off. Well, they went to pick up the mines one morning, and one of the guys hit the clacker, and the guy was picking up the Claymore mine. So it didn't have anything to do with any issues going on, okay.
Tell me about the names. It was interesting you say you didn't know the names of those 3 guys, but it sounded like there was an issue with names anyway, or the way you guys handled names. Yeah,
what had happened is that, over there, everybody called in, the newest guy was called Newbie. And then when the next replacement came in, then you got your own name, and life moved on. So you were, most times you used to be a newbie for, I don't know, maybe 10 days, and then everybody called your name. In my case, we didn't get a replacement for over 6 months. So everybody called me Newbie for 6 months because I was the new guy. And then when the replacements started coming in, nobody knew my real name. So everybody continued to call me Newbie. And because at that time I was in the Central Highlands, and there was no laundry, so they used to just issue us uniforms and put on new. They didn't wear a rank. Everybody knew what you were. It didn't matter. Okay. So nobody knew my rank. Nobody knew how long I was there. Basically, well, they knew my rank, but you didn't wear it. And then when the newer guys would start to come in, they'd call me Newbie. They'd walk up to me and say, "Hey, how many days have you been here?" Thinking I was going to say 5 or 6. And when I was at one time saying, well, over 300, a couple of times you see a little tear in somebody's eye, but that's just part of it. That just happened.
Yeah.
So.
Did you stay in contact with any of the guys you served with?
No, because they were in and out all the time, and depending on what your positions were, very hard. I can remember some of the names. I remember a guy by the name of Potter that I came home with. And when I say home with, they just hand you your orders that your tour is over, and it's up to you to get back. I know that seems crazy, but I'm telling you that's how it is. So you can't, there's no structure to get back. So they had the C-123 that used to come in and drop off supplies, and you had to run onto the back of the C-123. We ran onto the back, him and I. And we didn't even know where we were going when the plane took off, and then it lands on a base. And you could bump anybody when you had orders to leave. So you could bump an officer if he was on the flight because you were going home. And then the only order that it said, in my case, was Cameron Bay. So I had to get to Cameron Bay. And there was no official way for me to get there. I just had to get there on my own. And that was true of everybody. When they released you, you had to do that. And you had to either catch a helicopter or one of those C-123s, and then you could get there. And then you'd go to Cameron Bay, and you'd wait. They'd call your name and tell you when your flight was leaving. But the structure only happened when you got to where you were going.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
Now, when you were there, what did you guys do to entertain yourselves or, pass the time? Well,
to be perfectly honest with you, there wasn't a lot of entertainment. And the reason for that was they didn't need a lot because they actually worked you about 16 hours a day. Okay? And then, like when I was in Fire Support Base Brown, we worked 16 hours a day. And then every night you had to pull guard duty. So, and you couldn't sleep in there. So even if you did everything perfect, maybe, and you could fall asleep instantly, you got about 5 hours of sleep a night. And most people can't do that. And, and if anything ever happened, you're awake anyway. So you probably averaged, I want to say, 4 hours of sleep a night. on average. But because you're young, you can do it.
Did the stress of that type of routine have any impact on, or what type of impact?
Yeah, I think that the impact that I would have seen in that is there was a lot of little skirmishes over nothing, because the stress level was built up, and part of it probably because we're young, there's no women around, and you just see other guys. Some guys would blow up over nothing, and then they'd go after it. They'd all be apologetic because it was some stupid thing that meant nothing. But you saw a lot of that kind of thing, and I think more it was the stress and being tired all the time. But that was all.
When you had leave, where did you go?
Well, there was no such thing as leave. When I got R&R, I went to Bangkok for 5 days. And I went at the end of the tour only because I was afraid I would never go back. But that I wasn't alone. That was probably 90% of the people.
What was it like going to Bangkok and then coming back to that routine?
That was difficult, but I didn't have a lot of time left, and I knew that. At that time, I figured I had 2 or 3 months left max. So that encouraged me to go back, and I did that on purpose because I'm kind of like a coward, so I knew that I wouldn't be able to go back if I did it in the first couple of months. Yeah. So,
is there anything that happened over there that was, you reflect back on, seems kind of funny now, or that we might not, expect? There wasn't a lot of, we would horse around, don't get me wrong, but anything like that I can't remember. The worst thing that ever happened to me, I would say, incident like that, you may look at it as funny, but I wasn't looking at it as funny, there was one day, and it was the middle of the day, we took a break, and we went into some bunker there because it was cooler in the bunker. And some big officer came in, and everybody ignored him. He went down into the bunker. Everybody ignored him. And he kept asking, who's in charge, who's in charge? And finally, I just said, and I blank and blank to shut up, not knowing it was an officer. So the next day, I had to give a presentation to that whole group about the proper way to salute an officer. But that was, that part of it was about the thing I can remember. There wasn't a lot of joking stuff that I can remember because everybody was working all the time. That's how they kept, I believe that was their strategy. They had that, keep you busy, it keeps you out of trouble. So I believe that was the case. What type of interaction did you have with the, indigenous Vietnamese?
The only really time, every once in a while, I need to go back to my time in Lac Quay, okay? Lac Quay was a huge military base, okay? There was no chance of very much happening there. And they used to have civilians come in and they would clean your hooch so you could have that interaction with them, okay? And then that was in Lac Quay. And then we didn't have that any other place I was. They weren't allowed on the base or anything, but in Lac Quay. When we were working along Highway 13, and we're kind of like right outside of a fire base called Thunder 3. You're working on Highway 13, and they would come by in their vehicles on the road. They could do that, and there was a lot of them. And the only contact we would ever have is when they would stop, like if somebody was selling soda or something, and that was about it. Okay. They had a village outside of Thunder 3, but they kind of had it off limits most time. And so it didn't have an awful lot of contact with them. But the contact I did have, they were just like us. I don't think, when I could communicate a little bit with them, all they wanted was the war to stop. I don't think they cared who won. They just didn't want to fight anymore. They were just sick of it. That's what I got. But
now, being in an engineering group, did you get called on to do mine clearing or
yeah, a couple times, pretty often in the morning when we were in Fire Support Base Brown, we had to go out, and because the only access was a highway, and we had to clear the roads down below. It wasn't too bad. Never anything came up that was critical. We used to get mad because they'd pick up cigarette wrappers. Then you had to be careful. But there was a lot of misconceptions about that. We would just blow it up with C4, and there was none of this bayonet thing that people
That didn't happen. Who's going to be stupid enough to do that? So, and it was rare even that we actually found anything, but there was a few times.
Did you keep a journal or anything?
No.
Did you see many other guys keep journals?
No, I really don't think I remember anybody keeping a journal. But they could have, and they just didn't tell anybody,
So you said you were in about 10 and a half months?
Yeah, in Vietnam.
In country then? When you left Vietnam, where did you go?
Home. I got discharged from Fort Lewis, Washington. I had, back then I had 19, almost 20 months, and it wasn't worth it to keep 4 months. So I was a draftee. So at that time, if you had served in Vietnam and you had less than 5 months left, they would let you out. And that wasn't always the case. In the earlier part of the war, it was 3 months or less. But at the end, when they went through that Vietnamese there, where they were trying to turn the war over to the Vietnamese, they extended it to 5 months.
So what was your homecoming like?
Well, it wasn't a great reception all along the way back then in those times, especially in that year. But it was great. It was great to be home and see your friends and family because you couldn't really communicate with them. It's hard to believe, no cell phones. Everything was by letter. And so this first contact I probably had in them was basically in about a year. So it was nice to be home. And then you recognize all the different things that happened. People that were there didn't even recognize the changes, but when you would drive by and say, oh, they painted that or did that. And that's kind of interesting, And then I got to see a lot of my, friends again, because at that time most of them were out. So, and then we always have that common bond of being there and being able to talk about it, So.
Was there a sense that the country had changed since you left, and when you returned, did it feel differently? Yeah,
I think when I went in, the time when I was drafted, which I think was in May, that's actually when I went in. And when I got out, I could sense the difference. When I went in, it was like a lot of the people were, is this right or wrong? We don't know. And when I got out, it had definitely changed to the public opinion that the war was wrong.
What did you do? So you get out of the Army, you come back home. What did you do next? Did you go to school or did you go to work or both?
No, I went to work. Okay, what happened to me, and I was kind of lucky, is that I went to an engineering school and completed 2 years. And the company that I worked for most of my life hired me, knowing that I could get drafted. And the only reason they did that I believe that, was the guy that was head of HR was a colonel in the reserve. And so he did not stop that from, if I met the qualifications, he said he would hire him, and he did. And back then, as today, that meant that when I got drafted, they had to hold the job for me. And so I could get the job, and I went back. And I came back, and I think a week later, I went back to work because they had called me, to come back as quick as I could. And they weren't hiring at that time. So if I wasn't hired, I wouldn't have gotten that job.
Now, did you ever continue your education via the GI Bill?
Yeah. Yes, I did.
And where'd you go to school?
Central Connecticut, and I got a degree, a BS in industrial technology. And my associate's is in engineering.
So how's your military experience influence how you saw life?
That's an easy question to answer. I don't complain about issues that mean nothing. Okay, and by that I mean, if we don't have, if we run out of toilet paper while you're in there, I don't make a big issue and scream, oh my God, how could we run out of toilet paper? Okay, if the faucet doesn't work, I figure I can fix the faucet. Okay, and you see today a lot of people complain about, and the guys used to tell me, you don't ever get upset over this stuff. And I go, I don't think it's a big deal in the structure of life. I just don't think it's a big deal. And I think that part of it being over there and you don't have all the comforts of life. And when you do with them for a year, a roll of toilet paper, honestly, is not a big deal. It truly is not a big deal. And it doesn't matter. And that's the way that happened a number of times in my life. I could relate to that. They used to say, "Oh, you're not upset?" No, but I don't care. And I could see that.
Did you join any veterans organizations?
Yeah, I'm a member of the VFW.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. So.
And you're still in contact with other Vietnam veterans?
Yeah. Yeah.
Do you guys talk about Vietnam much?
We don't. It's kind of funny when we're together. That doesn't come up as a group. But if somebody that wasn't there, they start asking questions, I think then we'll talk about it. But I don't see us having a lot of conversations amongst ourselves. And maybe because we had it once, and you're not going to rehash the same stuff over and over again. Okay.
When other people mention Vietnam, what misconceptions do they tend to come with? Is there a theme there?
Well, I just think most people that went were just doing their duty as they perceived it. Okay, I think that's one. So I think most people that went there because they think they had a sense of duty to do that. Was there drugs there? Yeah, but it wasn't as prevalent, I believe, as you hear. I mean, I'm not saying it wasn't there because it was, but it wasn't a lot. And most of the guys that did hard-line drugs, and there wasn't many, wouldn't let you do it because they knew it was not good. Okay, so there was that aspect of it. And then the only thing, and I can't speak for any veteran but me, the only thing that made me mad was when Nixon let the guys that went to Canada come back into the United States. And in talking to a lot of veterans, that upsets a lot of us, not just me.
Did you know anybody that went to Canada?
I don't know them, but we had a high school reunion, and when the guy asked that all the veterans stand up, believe me, 80%, and he made a comment, he had gone to Canada, they let him back in, that we were the ignorant fools that went. So it kind of, it just reinforces my belief that he should have never done that. Because there was conscientious objectors there. Don't get me wrong. And their objection, they didn't want to kill anybody. Right. So there was plenty of jobs that, it didn't say you didn't have to carry a weapon. A lot of medics, which are some of the bravest guys there, they didn't carry a weapon, but they were there and they were in the middle of it. Right. So I don't want to hear that there was ways, and even if you could have got drafted, they could have had you work in a hospital here. You didn't need to go there, but you just served that. You didn't have to do anything. And that's the way a lot of us believe. Because nobody, especially me, I was probably more scared than anybody that ever went there. And so you had to deal with that. But I don't know, maybe they couldn't deal with it, but it didn't make it right that they went to Canada.
What was the scariest part about being there?
You just never knew. There was, it was just luck. I tell people that, but if you were in the wrong place at the wrong time, boom, like those 3 guys I told you about. And there was a couple other things that happened there. The guys just, wrong place, wrong time. It could have been you, it could have been somebody else, but, sometimes you had to be just lucky, It could have been you.
Did it make you any more or less religious?
No. No. The only thing I can tell you is that you didn't care what religion you were in. If there was a priest, a rabbi, a minister or something, a lot of guys went to church. But it didn't, there wasn't, the denomination didn't matter as much as you would think. But I don't think it made me any more religious. I wouldn't say that. But when you got an opportunity to go, a lot of people did it.
When you said you were living there, you said you lived underground a great deal. In Thunder 3 and in Fire Support Base Brown, not in Lock Hay. Okay, so in those 2 locations, you had to be underground because they saw a lot of artillery or mortars and rockets. So pretty much in Lock Hay, which was so big, I don't think they could put it underground, probably. But you lived in hooches, and outside of the hooches, they had bunkers. So if you got hit, you had to run into a bunker. Did when you got mortared, was it mostly nighttime?
Yeah. Yeah, they wouldn't. When I first got there, there was, I want to say, night after night, we'd either get rocketed or mortared. And like I said, they were after the helicopters. Okay, so, and then the other thing that they would do, you could figure it out after a while. Sometimes it was only one mortar. Okay, and it was like just to keep you so you couldn't sleep. It was just like, okay, let's fire in one, then everybody's going to be awake and we'll make them miserable for the next day. And, because that would happen. And then other nights there'd be many more, okay? And it just depended, okay? And in Lock Hay, a lot of that stopped after we invaded Cambodia. Mm-hmm. And that's when I noticed the big drop-off in the mortar and rocket attacks. You know, it went from constant every night to almost non-existent.
Wow. Now, you said you had helicopters, a helicopter group?
Yeah, they were in the 1st Infantry. They were attached to the 1st Infantry. And they were next to where we were, that our hooches were. So.
Did you do any travel by helicopter?
A couple of times. Not to do anything and, you know, just to get in and go someplace. But not, maybe twice. Most of the time that we traveled in deuce and a halves.
And how safe were the roads?
Not very. Well, Highway 13, you could buy books on it, and that was a main drag. And for the most part, when you were on Highway 13, you had to have some type of a protection with you, for the most part.
What type of protections would you need?
APCs, tanks. Generally speaking, you would travel that way. Okay. And for sure, the early part of the war, you had to. And we traveled under some type of protection. You know, and outside of the 1st Infantry Division, a lot of the protection was provided by, they had the 11th Armored Cavalry was in the area. And when we were working on the bridge, they had guys there. So.
How well did the Army prepare you for actually, you know, living in really what's kind of a tropical climate, snakes and insects?
Okay. As far as the insects, there wasn't a lot of training. Snakes, we had to attend a course, and I can remember it to this day. Pretty much you paid attention to, and how you tell a poisonous snake from any regular snake, which I can still do today. And outside of that, and they told us what to do and what not to do. The mainly thing that they wanted is to be able to recognize it, so that you knew, and that was easy once they told you. So, but there was insects, unbelievable. I mean, I never in my life imagined, you know. And then when you go to a monsoon, you understand why the insects are there, because there's so much water, and there's water everywhere, and you can't get dry. So for 4 months, you walk around. If you ever put on wet socks, there you are. That's your life for 4 months.
How do you live underground with that much water?
Not easy, but you have to do it. You don't have any choice.
Yeah.
You know, and there are a lot of rats. And you could understand that. Wherever there's food, there's rats, and everything's underground. And at night, there was no lights at night. So everything was dark, and the rats were out at night. If you had a flashlight, you could just show them the rats would be right where they'd come out. And you couldn't, no matter what they did, and try to stop them. There were some there, but it wasn't that bad of a problem, but they were there.
Did they use any defoliants where you were?
Oh, God. Agent Orange, Highway 13. Because there was, in the course of the war, that it was a main drag. They had the Agent Orange on all the way up the highway. All the way up. You could see the planes coming, dropping it. And 3 days later, there wouldn't be a leaf.
Have you experienced any health problems?
Well, the only thing is, and not me personally, but I had 3 kids, and all 3 were premature, and they think there's a relationship to it, but they're not sure. So that's all been documented. So, but at first they thought it was my wife, but no effects for my kids, me, that I'm aware of. But I got doused, I can tell you that. So, but I'm not the guy that was in the plane doing it every day. I mean, that's a different person. So, and that stuff did work. Somebody says, why'd they use it? I could tell you. You know, full foliage, and 3 days later in a leaf on a tree. So.
Did it help, you think, in terms of, keeping your avenues to view oncoming.
Yeah, back then, we thought that was all great.
Yeah.
So if somebody said, I don't think back then the issues were understood or even known, and if they were, we didn't know about them. But I have to tell you, if your sight that you could see to me was a big thing for your ability to do things, because you figure you got a little safe zone out there. You could see things coming. But I liked it when they did it. So.
Hey, what have you told your children about Vietnam?
Not much. Every once in a while they ask, but I find it very difficult. If you weren't there, you would not understand the hardships. I honestly believe that. A lot of people, you guys just say no. Because people brush it off like it's, yeah, okay. You know, a week's a long time when you're doing something you don't want to be there or doing. Yeah. And when it's month after month, it goes on. And, you know, people think it's just a flash in their mind and that, you know, it's gone. But when you don't have shower facilities, you never had flushing toilets, you know, and you go, I never had anything that was, to my knowledge, that was ever hot. You know, like, but what I mean by that is, like, I don't remember milk, ice cream, anything dairy. They tried at times to get you a hot meal as best they could. So I give them credit. And you could never be hungry because they had the sea rations everywhere. I mean, you could eat them all you wanted. But you didn't have a lot of hot meals all the time.
What about holiday?
They would try, and it ran in. I tried to tell you about it. I never knew what day it was. Yeah. I couldn't tell you it was Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. I certainly couldn't tell you the date. Okay, and the holidays it was the same on a holiday as it was any other day. Okay, so there was no difference to tell you what, it was a holiday. And guys would, certain holidays there was. For instance, New Year's Eve and July 4th, all the way on the bunker, anybody pulling guard duty was shooting off the weapons like, you know, making fireworks would do here. So those you could tell it was that day. But the rest of them, like Labor Day or anything like, they would just blend in. You'd probably, they will say Labor Day was last week. Okay.
And you told me an interesting story about money. Money really had no value?
Yeah, where I was, and the whole time, there was never any stores, so you couldn't buy anything. Okay, and you know, when you're in a fire support, there's nothing. You're with 200 guys. So money had no value. So what guys used to do is I always sent $200 home. And then when you get rank, I think the highest I ever made was $432. So you could send $200 home, and I think you could send home, they'd take it right out of your pay, the $200. But then you could send the money order home when they paid you, and I think that was $200. So I had 30 some odd dollars that I could do anything with, and I don't think I ever spent it. I don't ever remember buying anything there, ever. Now, maybe I did, but I don't remember doing it. So.
And you said that you'd have card games and people...
Yeah, we would play cards at night. We used the MPC. And a couple of nights, guys would win all the money. And the next night, now there's no entertainment, there's no TV, there's nothing. So the guys would give the money back to everybody so we could play cards again. And, you know, some of it could have been worth, I don't know, if you tallied it all up, I don't know, maybe $1,000, $2,000. Didn't matter. Had no value. And then when we go in R&R, guys would give other guys money because it didn't have any. Then they'd come back and they'd have extra money, didn't spend it all, and they'd give it to you. Because even when you went R&R, the cost in Bangkok wasn't expensive. So, you know, you didn't even spend all you took, you know, so. But I enjoyed that part, that money didn't matter. It really didn't. You could be poor or rich. Didn't matter. You were all on an even keel over there. So.
Now, have there been any reunions of your engineering group? Or?
I'm not aware of any, buddy. There was such a turnover there. And guys would get split up all the time. Because like they could take one company doing one thing and one doing another in another area. And then they'd put you back together in 2 months for a day or two. And back then, like I said, when they started that Vietnamization, there wasn't a big turnover.
So guys would leave and nobody new would come in for a while. And then when they had the big turnover, I was getting late in my time. So no, never did. You know?
Have you ever been interested in returning to Vietnam to see it?
That's a hard question to answer. I know because I saw a documentary on TV. Lock Hay's gone. They showed it there, and it's all overgrown. So there's nothing to see there. And where the other two fire support, I'm sure they were gone. They were in the middle of nowhere back then, and they were just flat services. They put the guns in. So there's probably nothing for me to see that I was there, to be honest with you. But I would like to go just so maybe somebody like my wife could see how hot it was when it was in the hot. And it wasn't necessarily the heat; it was the humidity. Yeah. It was just. I mean, I can remember them telling me one day it was 127, and the humidity was saturation. And you couldn't get a sunburn. It was a court martial, so you had to wear your green uniform. It was hot. I mean, to tell you it was hot, I mean, I would sweat. I'm a sweater. And I'd be soaked from the minute you got up to forever. And it would just stay that way. And so I felt, we were in the sunlight. We had to do our job. You couldn't get out of it. But the infantry guys, I mean, they're carrying a pack, and I couldn't imagine how tough that had to be on them. Because it was tough without carrying the pack. So
when you come back to the United States, you've got a bankroll of money you've been put away. Did you indulge in anyone?
Oh, yeah. What would you like to know? I spent it all.
The cars.
Bought a brand new Chevelle, bought a brand new motorcycle, and bought a brand new color TV. So I bought motorcycle, car, stereo system, and color TV. And then my money was gone. And then I had paid cash. It took me about a month to do all four.
What was the Chevelle like?
Oh, it was nice. Yeah. 1971 Chevelle, brand new with a 4-speed, typical thing that you would do when you're 20 years old. But that was nice. And all the money was waiting for me in Fort Lewis that you sent there. And so they asked you if you wanted a check or cash. So that was nice. So they give you, and then the money they took out was actually probably in your bank account at home. But that was nice. And then they had to pay you severance pay from the place you were released, which Fort Lewis, Washington, to the place where you were inducted was New Haven, Connecticut. Uh-huh. So they had to pay me money from Fort Lewis, Washington to New Haven, Connecticut. So that was a nice check. And then you go military standby, and it didn't cost you that much. So
nice.
That was nice. Yeah.
These are all the questions that I have, Gary. Do you have anything you want to add? Or is there any topic that you think would be?
No, the only thing that happens, like you had asked me a question about, how did it change your life? I think one of the things that upsets me is Americans think that everybody's a goody two-shoe. And by that I mean, everybody does everything right, and nobody would do that, and it's impossible. And I saw two things over there, and I thought it was bad enough I saw it once. But I saw it twice. And I cannot get rid of the pictures, and it's ingrained in me. And what it was, we went through villages twice. Okay, and there had to be, in both villages, I would say 30 people hanging. Okay, like you see in the old Wild West. And I want you to visualize 1970 this is, when you're seeing that many people. And the thing that bothered me was not the adults. When you see kids 1 year old, 2 years old, 5-year-old, hanging on some post in the middle of a village, and you're driving through, you say to yourself, how can this ever happen?
Who did the hanging?
Don't know. It was either the Vietnamese or the North Vietnamese, or the Viet Cong. I don't know. I'm assuming it was the Viet Cong and the North Vietnamese, but I don't really know.
Did you see Americans commit atrocities?
No. Nope. But that, all these people say it can never happen. Take my word. Yeah. It does, And there's things of value that people don't understand. At that time, women had no value in the Far East. No value whatsoever. And I can remember one of the guys in the engineering group, through a piece of equipment, ran over a girl, and she died. And the Papazon came up and was thanking the guy because it was one less mouth to feed, and women had no value. Yeah. Now, if he had killed a water buffalo, he'd have been upset because they did work plowing the field. He actually thanked them. So, totally, you couldn't do that in this country, and people don't understand the different cultures and what it does unless you've been there. And we do things different than they do. And I'm not saying we're right, and I'm not saying they're right, but to understand culture is a good thing. And now I look for that when I travel places. It's the culture change I want to see. And so maybe we think we're right, and I'm not sure we are all the time. I think sometimes we probably are, but seeing that kind of thing and understanding their culture back then, women had no value. None. So that part was interesting to see that.
That is remarkable.
Yeah. Yep.
Anything else about Vietnam or the military?
Nope. I'm just saying it wasn't, I don't think it was, it helped me in life, but I wouldn't recommend a lot of people go through it. Some people probably should, but,
Yeah.
it didn't do me any harm. I'm not saying that at all, okay? And it could have helped me in certain things, and in other things it's probably not good, but.
And where was your basic training?
Fort Dix, New Jersey. Yeah. Yeah.
That's a fairly big base, as I recall.
Yes, oh yeah. It was busy. I can tell you that. There was a lot of people going in and out back then. So, yep. But that was one of the big ones on the East Coast, and there was Fort Gordon in Georgia, and a couple other places. But they were all through the country.
When you trained, you did your basic training, then you went to do engineering stuff.
Yeah.
That was what was in Georgia?
Yeah, but there was a lot of it. Like I'm literally telling you, there was not a great deal of training because I was supposed to know what to do at that time because I had a 2-year engineering degree, and that's the only reason they put me in there, to be honest with you.
Now, is it mechanical engineering or civil?
Electrical.
Electrical engineering.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
So I kind of like they, and the only thing I ever did associated with that, to be honest with you, was run communication wire. Okay, that part over there, I did some of that. And that was about the only. Other than that, you just did whatever needed to be done. So they didn't care about your MOS. You had to chip in and help. And nobody ever complained. Everybody did everything to help everybody else. So. But for the most part, somebody always had a skill that's why they were in there.
Yeah, what did you learn over there that you might not otherwise have learned in terms of skills?
Well, I can tell you right now, I said, learning how to build a bridge and reading the blueprints, because you had to read them all the time. So I could probably build a bridge like and understanding that kind of stuff. And then, I got to work with, we had to build the forms and everything so they could do with the concrete. So I learned a lot about concrete, but that it was stuff like that. When we were building the decks too, I learned a lot about the artillery because you had to know how they worked to try to build these platforms that the guns would stay on. And I learned a lot about artillery being there, and you got to help them when they got to fire. And the only thing that I ever saw high tech, because today it's nothing, but back then is there was 2 things. One, the skylight that when we used to pull guard duty, they had those skylight light scopes.
Right.
They were huge. You know how they get the little glasses? These things were, I don't know, maybe a 4-inch diameter circle.
Right.
And they were, I don't know, 1.5 feet long. And you had to hold them up and look out. If there was a moon out, it wouldn't look like a green field out there, but you could see things out there if you had to, okay? But when the moon was not out, you couldn't see a thing. You might as well throw them away. They didn't magnify anything. And that was the greatest technology, one of them that I saw there. And we thought that was great, the skylight scope, because you could see if the moon was out. That's how we always knew when the moon was coming out, because, boy, you didn't want to be pulling guard duty when there was no moon, because it was black. There was, there's no lights. It's black, you can't even see your hand in front of you. It's so dark. Okay. So, and the other technology was that's when they just started to put the sensors out in the field. And the sensors were tied in like with the guns. You could actually see the guns moving with nobody on them, zeroing in on the sensors. And then the guys would come out and they'd have the coordinates. And I think back then, and I don't know because I didn't put the sensors out there, so I don't mean to pretend that I did. I guess the guys would walk through the trail and the sensors would pick up the heat from your body. And if enough guys walked through, then they figured it wasn't an animal, that it was thing. And then they knew they were there. And they'd zero in on that area with artillery. But that was the highest technical thing that I saw, and that was relatively new. So,
did they use metal detectors, like, so somebody walked between two poles and?
No, I never saw the sensors. I don't know what it was. They say they had to be hidden, so they couldn't be very big. But maybe it was almost like like an eye going in between two contacts, and when it broke, they knew something was going through. But they could get that signal back. That was in 1970, so think of that.
Yeah. And what would happen then? I mean, would they typically just fire on it? Or
they would just fire it. And the next day, they send guys out to look and see, did it do anything, or, was it whatever? And we had a couple cases, too, that we shot up animals at night on a bunker line. I mean, you don't know. You hear the cans clinking. You shoot. And, I can honestly tell you I probably was involved in killing a couple deer. Yeah. But that was it. So other than that.
Yeah, were you guys, like, attacked other than rockets? I mean, was there ever a sustained?
There was only one time that I stayed in Thunder 3 that we took a little bit of an attack, and we had one guy get killed, but that was about the only thing, and I wasn't heavily involved in that at all. So, but it just happened to be there. And then when you're pulling the guard duty in Lockheed, there's a couple times that somebody took a pot shot at you, and you didn't even know. And it's not like you hear the thing. And the first time it happened, we were in the bunker, and the bullet must have hit the front of it, and all these bullets kind of flew. I didn't know I didn't even pay any attention to him. One of the guys that had been here pulls me down. He said, "Jesus Christ, they just took a bullet." I didn't even know. I mean, but that was about it from that thing. It was mainly what I was involved in, especially at the beginning of our tour, a lot of mortar and rocket attack. But that was about it.
Now, what did you have for protection on the fire base? Was it like an infantry unit, or was it?
Actually, your protection was the guns. They had 4 guns. They had 2 175s and 2 155 Howitzers. And if you ever were under attack, the way the military worked, the other fire support bases near could protect you too. But they could lower that 155 to horizontal, and they had these shells that threw out these mini grenades. They would wipe out You didn't want to be coming in if that was the case. So the guns helped a lot. And then everybody pulling guard duty. Yeah. I mean, we still had a lot of firepower. When I look back, I was going to say they could overrun us any time. And I asked the question, why don't they? And the answer was, well, because they won't. Well, that didn't set too good. When I look back, we had a lot of firepower. Yeah. And, you're a radio away and you could get all the help. I mean, they weren't coming in that night, but all you had to do was hold out until morning and you'd have a lot of help. Because they had access to us. They knew where we were. I mean, if you think about it, it's the guys out in the field that are humping. They may not know exactly where they are and what they are and the tree covers. And we were they could have found us right away and helped us. So it wasn't as bad when I look back as I thought it was when I was there. Yeah. If that makes any sense.
Yeah, but there were fire bases that were overrun.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. But I said it would have been difficult. And like I said, a lot of this stuff stopped after the invasion of Cambodia. I'm just being honest. And I think that hurt them bad. And that's when they sent us up to the Central Highlands in Fire Support Base Brown. So I think that kind of worked. But that's just my opinion. Yeah.
Well, it makes sense. You go after the sanctuary.
Yeah.
It should help.
Yep.
Okay, is there anything else you want to add? I mean, this has really been helpful.
Yeah. No, I don't think so. I mean, I forget if guys you know, sometimes somebody mentions stuff or something and the memory comes back, but it's hard. You ask if anything funny happened before. Yeah. I should tell you this. Remember I told you about the bus? You get on the bus and they took us to we landed in Tonsonnet, and it was a huge military. I don't know why, I can't remember. I was only there for 3 days. Huge military complex. So they take us off the bus, and we're there. It's like, I don't know, 11:30 in the morning, right? And they put us in front, the whole bus, and some guy's got a little platform there, and he's going through some rules and regs as usual. And he says to us, he says, if you ever hear the sirens go off, that means there's incoming, and everybody run to a bunker. I'm literally telling, I couldn't make this up. 10 seconds later, the sirens go off. You never saw 300 guys scatter. We don't even know where we're going. We don't even know where the bunkers are to look for them, okay? And all I can remember is the guy up on the stage said, no, 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 and he's crossing his hands like this. So it must have taken, probably an hour later, we all got back together. Guys scattered because there was nothing. And what it was the 12 noon whistle for lunch break.
That's a great story.
So, you know,
that's a great story.
But he just told us if he ever hear it, it's incoming. Maybe he should have said, as long as it's not exactly 12 o'clock.
Yeah.
And I know that base was too big. You know, it was huge. It was the largest base in Vietnam, and I don't know why I can't remember it. But that's where it was.
Tonson Hut, right?
No, Tonsonnet was the Air Force base.
Oh, okay.
And it's right beside it. It was mammoth. And my brother had told me if you get stationed there, you got it made.
Yeah.
Okay. So when they said I was going to this base, I said, wow, I got it made. I was relieved. And then, of course, 2 days later, they signed me up. That was just a staging area being there. But it was where a lot of the Army guys came in, unless they were in the Central Highlands.
It wasn't Da Nang, was it? No?
No, Da Nang was the military base up north.
Okay.
But it was huge. It was unbelievably big. But that's what I could, that may be the funny story I should have told you.
It's a great story.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, unless you got anything else.
No, I'm good.
Thank you for your service. Thank you for doing this.
Yeah.
This is
Okay.
this will live in memorial at the Library of Congress for researchers from now till there isn't a Library of Congress, whenever that might be.
Okay, thank you.
But thank you so much.
Yeah.
Really appreciate it.
Okay.